In 1812, the most powerful man in Europe marched into Russia with the largest army the world had ever seen. More than 600,000 soldiers. They carried rifles, cannons, horses, and enough confidence to crush an empire. At their head stood one man, Napoleon Bonaparte, the conqueror of Europe, the undefeated emperor, the man who believed nothing could stop him. But within months, his army would freeze to death, starve to death, disappear into the snow. And when it was over, almost none of them would return home. This wasn't just Napoleon's greatest defeat. It was the beginning of the end.
By 1812, Napoleon wasn't just a king. He was Europe's nightmare. He had defeated Austria, humiliated Prussia, crushed massive armies across the continent. Nation after nation fell before him. To many people, Napoleon looked unstoppable. Some even believed he was a military genius sent by destiny itself. But there was one ruler who refused to fully obey him. Alexander I of Russia, the Tsar of Russia. At first, the two emperors had agreed to peace. But peace between powerful men rarely lasts. Russia slowly began ignoring Napoleon's economic blockade against Britain. And Napoleon took that personally. To him, it wasn't just disobedience. It was a challenge. And Napoleon never tolerated challenges. So in the summer of 1812, he made a decision that would destroy everything he had built. He would invade Russia.
Napoleon gathered the largest military force Europe had ever seen. French soldiers, Polish troops, German allies, Italian forces, hundreds of thousands of men marching together toward Russia. The ground shook beneath them. Many believed the war would end quickly. Napoleon himself expected victory within weeks. But the Russians had a different plan. Instead of fighting one massive battle, they kept retreating deeper into their own territory. Every time Napoleon advanced, the Russians disappeared. And as they retreated, they burned everything behind them. Fields, villages, food supplies, even entire towns. The French army kept moving forward, but Russia itself seemed to vanish before their eyes. Soon, Napoleon's soldiers began suffering. The summer heat was brutal. Disease spread rapidly. Horses collapsed from exhaustion. Food became scarce. Thousands were already dying, and they hadn't even reached Moscow yet. Still, Napoleon pushed deeper into Russia, because turning back now would look like weakness.
Finally, near the village of Borodino, the Russians stopped retreating. This would become one of the deadliest battles of the entire Napoleonic Wars. More than 250,000 soldiers collided in a single day. Cannons thundered across the battlefield. Smoke covered the sky. Men were torn apart by artillery. Entire lines vanished within minutes. The fighting was so brutal that some soldiers later described the battlefield as hell itself. By the end of the battle, tens of thousands were dead. Napoleon technically won, but it didn't feel like victory. His army was exhausted, broken, bleeding, and the Russians still refused to surrender. Then came the moment Napoleon had been waiting for. The road to Moscow was finally open.
When Napoleon entered Moscow, he expected triumph. He expected surrender. He expected the Tsar to beg for peace. Instead, he found silence. The city was nearly empty. Most civilians had already fled. And then, fires began spreading across Moscow. Massive flames consumed the city. Buildings collapsed. Smoke filled the air. Napoleon watched from the Kremlin as the city burned around him. Russia had abandoned its own ancient capital, rather than let Napoleon truly claim it. Still, Napoleon waited. Days passed, then weeks, but no surrender ever came. Winter was approaching, and suddenly, Napoleon realized he had stayed too long.
Then the Russian winter arrived, and everything collapsed. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Snow covered the roads. Food completely disappeared. Starving soldiers ate horse meat. Some even boiled leather just to survive. Men froze to death while marching. Others simply laid down in the snow and never stood up again. Thousands disappeared every single day. The retreat became chaos. Russian forces constantly attacked from the shadows. Cossack cavalry hunted exhausted survivors across the frozen landscape. Cannons were abandoned. Horses died by the tens of thousands. Entire units vanished into the blizzard. The greatest army in Europe was no longer an army. It was a nightmare. At one point, soldiers were so desperate, they fought each other over scraps of food. Many could no longer feel their hands, or their feet, or their faces. Some marched beside frozen corpses still standing upright in the snow. And through all of this, Napoleon kept retreating westward, trying to escape Russia alive. When Napoleon finally escaped Russia, the damage was catastrophic. Out of more than 600,000 soldiers who entered the campaign, only a fraction returned. Europe was shocked. For the first time, Napoleon looked vulnerable. The myth of the unbeatable emperor had been shattered. Soon, his enemies united against him. One by one, the empire he spent years building began collapsing. And only a few years later, Napoleon would lose everything. All because of one disastrous invasion. One terrible decision. One deadly winter.
Napoleon entered Russia as the most powerful ruler in Europe. But he left as a man marching toward defeat. The snow didn't just destroy his army. It destroyed his empire. And from that moment on, the fall of Napoleon had already begun.